Hey everybody. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Um, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to put out a series of videos that talk about what's going on around us right now. And I'm doing that. They're going to be short. I want them to be conversational. I don't even have any notes here. But I'm going to be doing one or two a day for the next, well, however long it takes. And what I want to do is help us have some words, gain some understanding that might help us going forward. I know that many of you have been really upset seeing the brutal deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and there's now a kind of a flashpoint where people are going, "Oh, there's something that needs to be done here. Obviously, something is wrong." But a lot of us don't know what to do or what to say or even how to think about these things, and so I want to help us just a little bit along the way. And so each little conversation, each video will cover very briefly a very specific topic. And so today I want to talk just for a minute about systemic racism. Now, systemic racism is a thing where we as white people often struggle with this. Racism we get, right? Some guy in a KKK outfit walking down the street proclaiming that we ought to kill all the black people. We're all like, that's racism. That's terrible. Um, or maybe even a police officer putting their knee on the neck of a of someone they're pulling in, like George Floyd, and killing them. We're like, yes, racism, and we say that's racism. We ought to get rid of it. People who do that are wrong. Almost everybody I know would agree with that. And I think that's what we'd like racism to be like. We'd love for it to be where it's just these individual people who are doing some really awful stuff, who think horrible things about others, and we find them. We either change them or push them away where they can't do damage, and we say, there, we've dealt with racism. That would be nice, to be honest. But it misses two critical things. One, by doing that, it allows me to ignore whatever racism and biases and prejudices I have in here. I would never put my knee on someone's neck. That doesn't mean I'm not prejudiced. But the second thing is, it ignores what is the root cause of all these things, which is that it is systemic. Now, we don't like that because systemic seems to imply that we're all in on it. And in some ways it does. But I think if you think about systemic a little bit, it'll make sense. Let me give you a couple of examples. We talk about, especially the last few years, a lot about the health care system. And we recognize that there's good things about the healthcare system and bad things about the healthcare system. But we talk about it as a system because we recognize that there's way more to it than simply me and my doctor, right? There's insurance companies, and there's nurses, and there's hospitals, and there's the government, and there's people who are trying to find cures for things, and there's pharmaceutical companies. There's all these things, and they're all connected together in such a way they create a system, which means if you want things to change, it can't just be between you and your doctor. It has to involve a whole system. And we all recognize that. Now, we might think it's a great system or a terrible system or an okay system that needs improvement, but we all recognize it is a system. Or if you work in some kind of IT thing, or there's a big IT part of your company or business, someone says the system is down. It's not simply a matter of my computer's not doing the thing it needs to do. It's that there's something wrong in the system. We got to figure out it's how these computers are connecting and communicating with each other, and it's what this large server is doing, and it's running fine, but something about the software that's on it makes it where it won't communicate with the printers, and we recognize that it's a system, and the system has to be fixed, not just an individual computer or printer. the same thing is happening in our country with racism. There is a system. Now, I think that would be easy for us to recognize if that system was slavery, right? If we could look out and there were black people being enslaved, living on plantations, and the law said that was legal. In fact, for them to run away is illegal. Then we would say, oh, okay, that's a system that is destroying them, that is enslaving them. And for a lot of us, the assumption is that once that system got dismantled, that so did systemic racism. But that's not the truth. Systemic racism has continued on since 1865. It didn't end with the Emancipation Proclamation. Let me give you just a little example of how systemic racism can work. Imagine a young man. He doesn't have to be white or black, just a young man. That young man grows up in a house. That house, if his parents own it, is, for most families in America, their primary source of wealth, right? Most of us don't just have giant piles of cash sitting around. I know I don't. I'm not Bill Gates. The one thing I own that is really worth anything is my home, that I kind of own. Oh, have a loan on it, but that I kind of own. So that is my piece of the wealth pie. But imagine living in a system that the system, for decades, made it difficult for your parents, your grandparents, to ever own a home. Through practices like redlining, through the ghettoizing of black neighborhoods, it was really difficult to own a home. The system worked against you. And so while white people were buying homes, investing their money there, the home becomes more valuable, they sell it for more, now they have more wealth, and they use that wealth to buy a nicer home, and then they have more money, and they're able to use that to maybe send a child to college or whatever. That's not happening for the vast majority of African Americans. Now, that right there is a systemic problem, but then it becomes compounded by other parts of the system. For instance, most schools receive their funding based on property taxes. So a school is going to do better the higher the value of the properties. Well, a bunch of people owning fairly nice homes, that's going to have higher property values. They're going to have more money. That school is going to have more money to do the things it needs to do with its students. But if it has been very difficult for you and other people like you to own a home, then you end up living in a place where very few people own homes, and the homes they own are not that valuable. Therefore, now there's lower property values, and so you go to a school that does not receive the same level of funding. Do you see how those systems start working together? And we know in America that the two big ways to grow wealth for the average person: ownership, education, especially college. And when that is made more difficult by the system over time, over decades, over generations, it makes it hard to get ahead. The average black family has around 10%, some estimates 5%, the wealth of a typical white family. The 500 richest white Americans in the United States have more money than all the African Americans combined. You see, that's how systems work. Now, there's nobody at the lever saying, ooh, we want to make it this way, or, oh, we really want to make sure we'll keep those black people down. There are a few people like that in the world, but that's not what most of us are like, and that's not what most of us have experienced. But because the system doesn't hurt me, I don't pay much attention to it. I move on. I do other things. I find my way ignoring the systemic problems of others because they don't affect me. You see, when we talk about things like privilege, we're not talking about simply like, I have it so great. It means that there are certain things I can just ignore because they don't affect me. Systemic racism is one of those. And so one of the first things we have to do, if we're going to be people who really seek to make a change, that we want to see a better world, we want to see a better church, we want to see a better country, one of the first things we have to do is be willing to look boldly in the face and say, yes, there is systemic racism. African Americans are being held back in general by our system. And I am a part of that system. And you are a part of that system. We all are a part of that system. And so do we need to change that part of us that if we have a part of us that really looks down on black people or thinks they're lazy, or of course we need to change that. That's a personal work. We need to change the prejudices that are inside of us. But if we love our black brothers and sisters, then we have to do the work of changing the system. I want to say one last thing. Because one of the things that's real easy to say in the face of something like this is say, well, the laws, they say that you can have the system. I grew up poor. Yes. And there are super rich, like black people. Have you heard of Oprah? But we don't use these anecdotes. What we use is the data. And the data shows, 100% the data shows, that the system is biased against our black brothers and sisters. So, next time, we're going to talk a little bit more about economics and how that affects the systemic racism in our country. Thanks for listening. Get out there and make this world a better place.